There's a strange thing about this place, and you can feel it before you can explain it. We are inside one of the busiest suburbs in Minnesota, minutes from a freeway, minutes from the largest shopping mall in the country. And yet the trail ahead of us goes into oak woods and out onto open prairie, past a lake with swans on it, and for long stretches there is no building in sight. None of that is an accident. Someone decided this. We are in Bloomington, Minnesota, on the south side of the Twin Cities, a few kilometers north of the Minnesota River. This is Hyland Lake Park Reserve, and it is part of a larger protected block called the Highland Bush-Anderson Lakes Park Reserve, which runs to roughly 2,500 acres. It is managed by an agency called Three Rivers Park District, and the word reserve in the name is doing a lot of work. A park reserve is not the same thing as a park. Under the district's own policy, no more than 20% of a park reserve may be developed for active use. At least 80% has to be restored to a natural state and kept there. That is a promise made in writing, and it is the reason the land on either side of this trail is prairie and oak and marsh, and not a subdivision. To understand the shape of the ground here, you have to go back to the ice. During the last glaciation, a great tongue of the Laurentide ice sheet pushed down out of the northwest across what is now Minnesota. Geologists call it the Des Moines Lobe. It carried ground-up rock from the Dakotas and Canada, including shale, which is why the till it left behind is gray-brown and full of pieces of somewhere else. A branch of that ice, the Grantsburg sublobe, turned northeast and pushed directly across the ground we are moving over now, roughly 12 to 14,000 years ago. When ice does that, it does not leave a flat floor. It leaves a mess. Low knobs of dumped debris, closed hollows with no outlet, ridges that go nowhere. Look at the lumpy, irregular terrain around this trail. That is what a melting glacier leaves behind. Some of those hollows hold water and they have a specific origin. As the ice front wasted back, enormous blocks calved off and were left stranded, and sediment washed over and buried them. The buried ice sat there, insulated, sometimes for centuries. When it finally melted, the ground above it collapsed into the hole. Geologists call the resulting pit a kettle. Fill a kettle with groundwater and you have a lake. That is what these lakes are. Hyland Lake, Bush Lake, Normandale Lake, and the Anderson Lakes further east are a scatter of hollows in glacial debris, not a river system. They do not drain into one another in any grand way. They are pockmarks, filled with water, in a landscape that ice dropped and then walked away from. Minnesota has thousands of them, and most of its famous lakes are exactly this. The reason the water sits rather than draining away is the till itself. Glacial till is not sorted like river sand. It is a jumble of clay and silt and gravel and boulders, all mixed together, and clay-rich till holds water the way a clay pot does. That is also why so much of this park is marsh and wet meadow, and why the ground beside this trail is soft and black and smells like a swamp in May. When surveyors first mapped this country, a great deal of it around here was hardwood forest, part of a belt the French called the Bois Grand, and the Americans called simply the Big Woods. Sugar maple, basswood, American elm, red oak. Dense, dark, closed canopy forest that ran from roughly the Mankato area northwest to St. Cloud, in a broad diagonal band across southern Minnesota. Here is the surprising part. The Big Woods was not ancient. The best current thinking is that it established itself only about 300 to 600 years ago, during a cooler and wetter stretch of climate, in places where lakes and rough terrain and wet ground blocked the fires. Prairie fire is what kept trees out of most of southern Minnesota. Where fire could not reach, the maples moved in. So this ground sits on a boundary. Forest on one side, prairie and oak savanna on the other, and the line between them was drawn by fire, not by soil or rainfall. Watch this trail as it moves from closed canopy into open grass and back again. In a real sense, we are moving back and forth across an argument between two ecosystems that has been running for centuries. The third landscape here is the one in between. Oak savanna is scattered big trees standing in grassland, with sky between the crowns. Bur oak in particular can survive a grass fire because its bark is thick and corky and its roots run deep. A savanna is a forest that fire keeps thinning out. Stop the fires, and within a few decades it closes up and turns into ordinary woods. This is Dakota homeland. The Bedewakantonwan, one of the Dakota bands, lived along the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers here, and the Dakota are a living people today with communities across this state, not a chapter in a book. The river a few kilometers south of this trail is the axis of that world. Everything about this landscape, the oaks, the marshes, the lakes, was known and named long before any of it was surveyed. In 1839, a Dakota leader known in English as Cloud Man moved his community from the shore of Bde-Maka-Ska, in what is now Minneapolis, to a site on the Minnesota River bluffs in what is now southern Bloomington. The place was called Oak Grove. It is only a few kilometers from this trail. In 1843, two American missionary brothers, Gideon and Samuel Pond, followed and established a mission there. The Ponds are a complicated part of this story. They learned the Dakota language, they helped devise a written form of it, and their work is one reason a great deal of Dakota language material survives. They were also agents of a project meant to remake Dakota life entirely. Both things are true. Gideon Pond's house still stands in Bloomington, and the site is a city park today. Then came the land. In 1851, treaties signed at Traverse des Sioux and at Mendota transferred a vast portion of southern Minnesota out of Dakota hands, on terms that were misrepresented at the signing and then broken afterward. The ground under this park changed owners on paper in that decade. What followed for the Dakota in this valley was catastrophic, and we will come back to it in another place. What arrived instead were farms. Bloomington was cleared and plowed and stayed agricultural for 100 years, growing produce for Minneapolis and St. Paul just up the road. By 1880, the whole township held about 820 people. Look closely at the tree lines in this park, and you can still read old field boundaries and fence rows in them. This was somebody's back 40. That century of farming did something permanent. It broke the prairie sod, drained the wet meadows, cut the oak groves for fuel and fence posts, and stopped the fires. The soil stayed. Almost nothing else did. The restored prairie we pass through here is not a survival. It is a reconstruction, seeded and burned back into existence on purpose, on ground that was corn and hay within living memory. And then very suddenly, Bloomington stopped being a farm town. In 1950, it held roughly 10,000 people. By 1960, it held over 50,000. That is a five-fold increase in a single decade. Highways, tract housing, the post-war boom, cheap mortgages, and a wave of young families moving out from the city into what had been open farmland. In 1960, the voters agreed to stop being a village and become a city. Bloomington turned into the textbook American suburb, more or less overnight. Land moving at that speed does not usually survive. In an ordinary version of this story, everything on both sides of this trail would now be cul-de-sacs, and the lake would have houses around all of it. That is what happened to most of the lakes in this metro area. The reason it did not happen here is a decision made by people who were watching the bulldozers coming. The Minnesota legislature cleared the way in 1955, and in 1957, the Hennepin County Park Reserve District began operating. Over the following 2 decades, it bought nearly 21,000 acres of land, deliberately, ahead of the development wave. It is now called Three Rivers Park District. Almost every large green space you will find in the western and southern suburbs traces back to that buying spree. That is the whole strategy in one sentence. Buy the land before it is expensive and before anyone has built on it. It required people in the 1950s and 60s to look at a cornfield outside a small town and correctly guess that in 30 years it would be surrounded. They guessed right, and the land they bought is the reason this suburb has any wild ground left at all. There is a hill in this park, and in a state this flat, a hill is worth something. A downhill ski area opened on this ground in the late 1950s. It was originally called Mount Normandale. The Park District bought it and renamed it Highland Hills, and it is still running, an artificial winter mountain built out of a glacial knob in the middle of a suburb. And near Bush Lake, on the other side of the reserve, there are ski jumps. People have been jumping on this ground since around 1930, and the Minneapolis Ski Club, which has been going since 1926, still operates here. The current large jump platform was built in 2000. On a winter evening, you can watch someone launch off a scaffold and fly in Bloomington, Minnesota. Near the middle of the reserve sits Richardson Nature Center, the largest of the district's nature centers. It is a low building tucked into the trees, with a rooftop photovoltaic array that supplies a large share of its own electricity. Inside there are resident raptors, reptiles, amphibians, and a window onto a bird feeding station. Outside there are miles of trail, which is the actual exhibit. A nature center in a suburb is doing something specific. Most of the children who come through here will grow up with a lawn and a street and a screen. The bet is that if you put them in front of a real barred owl and then walk them into a real oak woods, something sticks. It is not a sophisticated theory. It appears to work. Watch the water. There are trumpeter swans here, and they are not decorative. They are the biggest waterfowl in North America, and they were shot out of Minnesota entirely. They were gone. The bird you may see on this lake is the result of a deliberate reintroduction that this same park district began in 1966, starting with a single pair brought from a refuge in Montana. It took decades. Captive breeding pairs, young birds released at 2 years old, winter refuges maintained so they would survive the cold, and years of patient monitoring. Through the 1980s, the free-flying flock was still small enough to count individually. Today, trumpeter swans nest across Minnesota in the thousands, and they nest in this park reserve, and it is one of the great conservation successes of the region. Ospreys nest here too, on platforms in the wetlands, and they were also brought back after being wiped out of this metro area. An osprey is a fish hawk, and it will hover over the shallows and then drop feet first straight into the water. If you see one working this lake in May, stop and watch it. It is one of the best things this park does for free. And May is the month for it. The oaks are only just leafing out, so the light still reaches the forest floor and the spring ephemerals are up. Bloodroot, hepatica, trout lily, wild ginger. They have a few weeks to flower and set seed before the canopy closes over them and the woods go dark for the summer. It is a compressed, urgent little season, and then it is gone. The birds are moving too. In May, this park sits under a migration corridor, and warblers are dropping in overnight, feeding hard and leaving again. Some are going to the boreal forest 1,000 kilometers north. The wetlands here are a filling station. That is what a place like this really is in the ecological sense. Not a destination, a service station on a very long route. The wetlands are also doing quiet engineering. They hold stormwater from the streets and parking lots around them, slow it down, and filter it before it reaches the Minnesota River. Cattail and sedge and bulrush are, among other things, a water treatment plant that nobody built and nobody pays for. Drain a marsh, and the cost of the drainage shows up somewhere downstream on somebody else's bill. Restoration is not a one-time event. The prairie in this park has to be burned on a rotation, or the woody brush moves in and shades it out. The buckthorn and the garlic mustard have to be fought permanently because they are not going to stop. The savanna has to be thinned. A restored landscape is a landscape that somebody is still working on every year forever. Here is the honest arithmetic of this place. Bloomington has around 90,000 people. It has an airport on one side and a freeway through the middle of it. This reserve is not wilderness and does not pretend to be. What it is 2,500 acres that were not sold in a place where everything else was, and that turns out to be worth an enormous amount. So the ground under this trail is glacial rubble. The lake is a melted block of ice. The forest is 600 years old, the prairie was replanted, the swans were brought back one pair at a time, and the whole thing exists because a park board in the 1950s bought a cornfield. Very little here is untouched. Almost all of it is chosen. That may be the real lesson of a suburban park reserve. Wild land near a city does not survive by luck. It survives because somebody drew a line on a map, held it, and then kept doing the unglamorous work of burning and cutting and counting birds for 60 years. This place is proof that it can be done, and it is still being done today. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.